Doki Doki Literature Club was a visual novel released in 2017, with an expanded release in 2021. It was largely created by Dan Salvato, with others helping for the art. It was a very standard, cutesy visual novel about dating girls in high school, one of thousands that exist. But then of course, as everyone knows, it's not quite that simple. Doki Doki is a psychological horror game in which the characters become worse and more intense as time goes on, all in a ploy to get the main character to fall for Monika. That's the general idea. So now I think it's best to discuss... I wish to discuss what the actual video is about, why I think that Doki Doki shouldn't have been a horror game. Now I'll preface this by saying that I really like how the game is already. I'm not saying my proposal is better than what we have, but rather just a sort of exploration into what could have been and how they could have focused on what I found to be some of the more compelling parts of the story. If you disagree, it's completely fine. If you agree, well then, that's great. It's only my opinion after all. How I view DDLC is that there are two main sections in the game's story. This can be easily divided into Act 1 as the preamble, while the other acts are the horror. The only tampering done by Monika in Act 1 is causing Sayori to go from depressed to suicidal. But what I love most about Act 1 is that these little glimpses you see into the darker sides of these characters is how they actually are. I will get into more of that a little bit later, but first I think it's important to quickly go over an example of how the game writes about these heavy topics. The part of the game that personally had the strongest effect was Sayori's mental health. Despite the veneer of a cute dating sim, there was a representation of mental health and depression which was just a little bit too realistic. How the game hinted to Sayori's mental health by giving her standard anime girl characteristics, like how she was hungry all the time or sleeps in late every day, but they were really just a symptom of a mental illness. Both sleeping too much or not enough, and eating too much or not enough are symptoms of a depressive disorder. And how Sayori thinks of herself as a burden to those around her if she opens up, and her abysmal self-esteem are all things many youth with poor mental health experience, and how it's represented in the game was a little shocking. And of course, this isn't the only character that's like this. I just use Sayori as an example. Yuri in Act 1 hints at self-harm, most obviously with the raccoon poem, in which she discusses indulging in a bad habit, while also providing a very detailed description of how the knife cuts through the bread that she feeds to the raccoon. There is also the reveal of her knife collection if you choose her for the festival prep. Natsuki also has a darker side, with her abusive father and the lack of self-worth due to it. While it's not as obvious in Act 1 as Sayori, or even Yuri, there are obvious hints to her father and how he treats her. Her desperate need for validation can be seen when, if the protagonist writes all the poems for her, she asks if he thinks hers are the best, only to begin begging him to say it, even if he doesn't really mean it. All these characters have real complexity, but still give the impression of just a bog-standard dating sim characters. The reason why I bring all this up is that while I love the direction the game ended up taking, I really want to see a version of the game where instead of Monika worsening these character traits, it proceeds as normal, but you just learn more about the gritty reality behind these people, with an unapologetic discussion of these topics. In the actual game, while I do really like the horror, it does remove the nuance in the writing, as you get slapped across the face with these characters' issues, since Monika is making them worse and worse. It loses the creepy and horribly realistic dread. This is what I mean when I say it shouldn't have been a horror game. I do understand though that this leaves one main issue: Monika. The whole game revolves around her, but only in a way that would be completely removed in my version. I do have a proposal, but I think someone smarter could think of something better. One thing I found very interesting about Monika is when she described how difficult it was living with people who were programmed, how awful it must have been being the only one with real thoughts and free will. I think that by reframing the situation, maybe Monika will be just another one of the girls to get closer to, and her darker side is how cripplingly lonely she feels, and how she would grow a dependence on the main character. My main issue with this fix is that it obviously removes the whole through line and central aspect of Doki Doki, which is Monika's impact and control over everything. So like I said, it really isn't perfect, just a proposal. Overall, the purpose of this video isn't to say that Doki Doki's bad, because it's not exactly how I wanted it to be, but rather just explore another idea as to what it could have been. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts, and if so, maybe subscribe for future videos. If you have any thoughts of your own, please let me know. I love reading about them and discussing it with you. Until next time, bye.